I was in the middle of responding to an email from a client when my phone screen lit up. My mother's name, Alora Dunn, flashed before me. I let the call ring twice before I picked up. "Hi, Mom," I said. Alora's tone sounded uncharacteristically cheerful, almost celebratory. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. "Hey, I just wanted you to know Victor and I are leaving for South America tomorrow. Isn't that something?" I just stared for a moment. "Sorry. What?" "Oh, right. I nearly forgot. Actually, I didn't really forget. I just didn't feel like making a huge deal about it. We went ahead and sold the lakeside cottage and your hatchback. We really needed the funds quickly, and since you weren't using them, it seemed fine. So, yes, everything's wrapped up now. The funds are in the account. We take off tomorrow afternoon. I love you, my dear. I'll send you plenty of photos." Then the call dropped. I looked at myself in the faint reflection on my laptop's black screen. I could hear the barista behind me refilling someone's mug and calling out a customer's name. Outside, the traffic kept moving as if everything was completely normal. It wasn't that everything had changed, but things definitely felt different. She used the word "we," and by that she only referred to herself and Victor, excluding me. The lakeside cottage had belonged to our family ever since my childhood. My father, Gerald Dunn, had constructed the dock himself. My hatchback, an old Volante I had restored one summer with Gerald, wasn't showy, but it was truly mine. Still, as far as she was concerned, both were now out of my life. She got rid of them effortlessly, just another task on her checklist. Slowly, I shut my laptop. I felt no urgency or distress. Deep down, I'd anticipated this moment's arrival. I had a course of action ready, even if part of me doubted I'd ever actually use it. After drinking a final mouthful of my now tepid coffee, I rummaged through my bag and retrieved a second phone meant for just one person. I made the call. It only rang once. Clara Dunn's tone was measured and succinct, yet unmistakably familiar to me. "I went through with it," I informed her. "I sold the house and your hatchback." There was a moment of silence. I nodded in understanding and waited for confirmation. A quiet breath escaped from my nostrils. "Yes," I agreed in a low voice. "Let's begin with the property records," I suggested softly. "I'll return your call in an hour." I hung up and slipped my phone back into my handbag. All around me, the usual buzz of the cafe continued uninterrupted. Nobody seemed aware that someone had tried to erase my existence, but she missed a crucial detail. She failed to remember the lessons my father, Gerald Dunn, had instilled in me. I learned how to get ready silently, how to bide my time with patience, and how to defend what belonged to me long before she realized its significance. For 15 months, the envelope had occupied the back of my dresser drawer. I had moved it twice. First when I relocated to Bellingham, and again while tidying up after the holidays, yet I never once looked inside. Not once did I feel the urge to peek at it. My father's script remained clear across the front, addressed to me. "Open this when you feel prepared." The day he placed it in my hands was a morning I'll never forget. We sat side by side on the porch of the lakeside cottage. I had made the drive in from Olympia just for a brief weekend visit. My father poured a mug of coffee for me, then set an envelope down between us as casually as if it were just a store receipt. "Don't open it," he instructed, "unless something comes up. And only when you truly feel ready." I assumed he meant something major, perhaps getting arrested or learning he had a fatal illness. He never mentioned heart attacks. He didn't say anything about collapsing in the garage on a Tuesday morning while swapping the brake pads on my hatchback. That envelope became a quiet presence I coexisted with. I continued to pay the property taxes on the lakeside cottage because it seemed like a way to respect my father's memory. I let my mother borrow the hatchback because it felt like the right and proper thing to do. Yet now she had gotten rid of both, as if they were nothing but yard sale leftovers. I placed the envelope down on the dining table. My fingers did not tremble, yet there was a dull ache pulsing in my chest that I couldn't quite identify. I tore open the seal with my thumb. There were 5 papers inside. No note, no directions. The first was a transfer deed with a notary stamp. The lakeside cottage had been put under an LLC 2 years prior to my father's death. The second was identical, except it concerned your hatchback. The following 2 related to rental units in Olympia that I hadn't been aware my father owned, both duplexes. The final document was a filed certificate of organization for Elmbridge Capital LLC. Every detail, my name, my home address, Gerald Dunn's signature, and his accountant's, was present, all perfectly legitimate and indisputable. I sat back and looked at the table, at the paperwork that proved what I now realized my father had always understood. Somehow, even in the silence, my father had anticipated what lay ahead, and I had not put my faith in her. I carefully refolded everything and put it all back into a manila folder. After that, I grabbed my phone and dialed Eli Fisher once more. Eli answered so swiftly that the first ring hadn't finished yet. I told him she was never entitled to sell a single thing. Eli responded, "So we're not only on the defense, we're steering the ship now." The following morning, I met Eli at his workplace first thing. His office was situated in a repurposed mill, its red bricks and iron supports modernized with muted gray paint and sleek, unassuming signs. Eli let me in personally with a buzz. "Would you like coffee?" he offered. "No time," I replied, handing over the manila folder without delay. "Let's begin with who's buying." Eli slid the papers out and glanced through them. "Wait, the buyer named here? Morgan Priest. That's quite a coincidence." I offered only a faint smile. "It isn't random." Eli lifted his eyes to me. "You built this into your backup plan." "Morgan and I had discussed it from the beginning," I said, after Gerald Dunn's funeral. "Morgan Priest and I shared a room during my first year of college. Morgan works in real estate these days. I never revealed the whole story to her. I only shared what was necessary. I feared being manipulated and hoped to safeguard whatever remained. If my mother tried to offload any assets without the proper authority, Morgan agreed to discreetly purchase them on my behalf. She assured me she would hold on to the property until I could sort everything out. Eli Fisher leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. "So, your mother attempted to sell property she didn't rightfully own, and your official representative is someone you legally authorized. That means we have more than just grounds to overturn the transaction. We can sue her." "Yes," Eli said, "but you were already aware of that." I gave a silent nod. I had no desire to go to court, and he looked at me quizzically. I didn't want to embarrass her. My hope was that she would realize the consequences of her actions. I wanted her to experience the outcome, not as retribution, but as a result of her own choices. Litigation people like her never take responsibility, so there was no use trying to explain things. Eli Fisher paused before placing the documents down in front of me without a word. He asked what I intended to do. I explained that we would halt everything, discreetly reverse the transfer, have all assets restored in my name, freeze Elmbridge Capital LLC, inform the county, and when she returned from South America, the lingering quiet would speak for me. She would come back to find herself a stranger to her own home. Eli simply responded with a slow, deliberate nod. And as for Morgan Priest, I said she would hold the deed for a little while longer. When my mother tries to come home again, Morgan will be the one refusing her entry. I don't want my own signature on those rejection documents. Not yet, anyway. He tapped his pen and seemed thoughtful for a moment. He told me I'd considered every possible detail. 2 years, I said. Gives me plenty of time to get perspective. He slid the file folder back in my direction. Then let's make this official, he said. By midday, we had already started the reversal process. When night fell, I had returned every property managed by Elmbridge Capital LLC to restricted status. Now, it was her turn to find her own way to fail. I saw pictures shared from the airport, with my mother in large sunglasses. Victor held up a passport as if it were a lucky boarding pass. The message on the post announced, "Time for our next chapter. You're up here. We come." I stayed silent. No comment, no like, no response. In her mind, I was holed up in Bellingham, feeling abandoned. That was the narrative she liked best. Believing it allowed her some peace at night. I chose not to challenge her version of things. While they enjoyed glasses of champagne somewhere above the ocean, I made my move quickly. Eli Fisher took charge of filing the paperwork to reverse things with the local authorities. Morgan Priest sent the deed back to me in an envelope sealed shut. I accessed the management dashboard for Elmbridge Capital LLC and revoked all permissions to any assets associated with me, properties, vehicles, and the earnings from the rental business. Handling my hatchback was simpler. The title had never completely transferred. With just a few clicks, it was formally taken off the market. Victor had left it in long-term parking at the Salem airport. I made arrangements for it to be collected, cleaned, and brought back to my garage. The lakeside cottage required a more delicate approach. Eli put together the eviction notice under Elmbridge Capital LLC's name instead of mine. From a legal standpoint, it didn't even have to mention me at all. Morgan would be named as the authorized agent on the document when it appeared 30 days after my mother's planned return. That gave her just enough time to settle in, decompress, and then find the letter taped to the front door. I didn't feel anger. That was unexpected. I had anticipated that emotion, but what I felt was something quieter than resentment. It was a sense of distance, the kind that settles in when I finally accept that someone cannot be what I wish. My father used to say, "There are people who don't go. They wait until they're made to." My mother had always belonged to that category. I used to picture her eventually coming to her senses, realizing that family couldn't be treated like currency. But that was before I discovered her signature on those counterfeit papers. Before I listened to her airy, jubilant tone in my ear that day, informing me that everything I cherished was already lost, I believed things could still be salvaged. People say vengeance is best delivered cold. But what happened wasn't revenge. It was my awakening. I wasn't handing it to her. I was making sure she faced it all on her own. Then I took your hatchback on an extended ride, gliding past the lakeside cottage she believed belonged to her, and I drove into dusk as if nothing had ever been stolen from me. She arrived 4 weeks earlier than I might have anticipated. There was no phone call, no heads up, only a sudden knock at my apartment late on a Thursday. When I answered the door, I hardly recognized her at first. Her hair, which I always remembered meticulously styled in her travel photos, was now pulled back with a plain elastic. Her once elegant bag looked worn out, its shape distorted as if it had survived a rough trip through customs. Dark circles had formed under her eyes. We stood wordlessly for a brief moment. "Clara Dunn," she eventually murmured, her voice subdued. "Is it all right if I come inside?" I moved aside to let her in. I watched as Clara entered my apartment as though it were still hers, inspecting the room as if she were searching for evidence of her own decorating touch, despite never having been there before. She lingered by the kitchen island, seeming to wait for me to invite her to talk. Instead of speaking, I made her some tea. We remained quiet, listening to the soft sound of the kettle heating up. With her fingers encircling the mug, she gazed into the wisps of steam. "Victor left," she told me. "He's in Barcelona now. Met a 23-year-old backpacker from Genoa on a boat trip. He claimed he needed to figure out who he is. He took whatever money we still had and disappeared." I gave a single nod, not out of compassion, just to indicate I understood. She continued, "I tried to book a flight home using my miles, but there were no funds left in the account. I had to ask a complete stranger at the airport for money so I could call the airline. And once I arrived, I honestly didn't know where else to turn. Hidden among her words, there it was, the honest admission beneath everything else she'd said. I kept quiet for a few moments, letting the silence stretch between us. "You can stay here," I eventually offered, "but only for a short time." She blinked in astonishment. "Thank you, sweetheart." I realized I hadn't earned her gratitude. I didn't deserve it. We argued. She took up residence in the guest bedroom. I handed her fresh towels, a set of keys, and the password to the Wi-Fi. I chose not to question her about her upcoming plans, and she refrained from asking how I had gotten by since her departure. Every night she prepared dinner, small, imperfect attempts to bring back the dishes from my childhood. She washed the dishes every morning before I got up. I let her believe that these gestures carried some meaning. Whenever my mother inquired about my job, I greeted her with a smile. I simply smiled and nodded when she mentioned the possibility of job hunting, though at the same time I quietly kept track of things. I noted each receipt from my card that she spent, every call she made from my phone, and every time her words didn't match something she'd said earlier. I wasn't gathering proof with the intention of using it against her. Instead, I was compiling this information for myself, to have a record. For me, granting forgiveness without full understanding didn't count as true forgiveness. It felt more like a blade. I was tired of having sections of my life wiped away. When my mother, Alora Dunn, turned in early one evening, I retrieved the old notebook reserved for client briefings and flipped to a new sheet. At the top, I wrote, Alora Dunn. Next, I jotted down the date my mother came back. She secured the position on her own. I hadn't inquired where my mother was headed as she left earlier that day, clutching a rumpled CV and borrowing one of my sweaters. Several hours later, my mother came back and set a folded note on the kitchen counter, mentioning, "It's night shifts, cleaning offices in 2 buildings, minimum wage. They said I could start tomorrow if I was interested." I told my mother she should take it, and the matter was settled. During her first week, Alora hobbled home with aching feet and tense shoulders. I left Epsom salts just outside the bathroom and made no remark when she didn't acknowledge it. Each morning my mother would be up before me, pulling herself along. I got myself out of bed before sunrise, so I wouldn't have to face the shame of anyone catching me still asleep. Everything felt overly staged, with a touch of perfection that seemed just a bit too deliberate. It felt as though the right kind of hardship was being put on display, calibrated perfectly so people would take notice. She exhibited a certain modesty, just visible enough for others to acknowledge it. Yet there were occasions when she simply forgot to perform her routine. One afternoon, I stumbled upon her in the laundry room, scrubbing the cuffs of her work pants by hand. Even though the washing machine was available, she didn't hum a tune. Instead of putting on an act, she focused intently on scrubbing, her lips pressed into a hard, even line. On another evening, I saw my mother sitting at the kitchen table, a notepad in front of her, carefully tallying up her hours and spending as though she was piecing a new existence together from nothing. There was no one there to see her. No need for her to explain what she was doing. I sat back and watched. I didn't offer any compliments or step in to help. That wasn't the purpose at all. She made herself modest meals, lentils, rice, canned vegetables, and now finished every serving, no longer leaving any food uneaten. When I watched her push her food around her plate, she had the detached air of someone who'd always had plenty. Now and then, she would talk about picking up a second job, signing up for GED courses, or mention that she used to dream of being an interior designer before life became tangled. I didn't pry into what tangled meant. She kept that to herself. In those moments, we were not simply mother and daughter. Instead, we were just 2 women facing each other, each aware that neither of us was in control. Still, things changed after she stopped searching for it. She never brought up the lakeside cottage, nor did she mention my hatchback. It could be that she thought they were gone, or perhaps she realized they were still around and simply chose to keep quiet. Perhaps she was waiting for me to initiate the conversation. However, the absence of words carries its own weight. It can either draw me in or teach me to exist firmly, unapologetic in my own space. Late one evening, as I walked past her door, I heard her weeping quietly to herself. It wasn't loud enough to alert anyone or for anyone to offer comfort. It was simply the gentle weeping of someone whose familiar life had fallen apart, unsure whether I could rebuild a new one from nothing. The second envelope was tinier than the first. I had nearly let it slip my mind. I discovered it hidden behind an old photo album at the very bottom of my desk drawer. This time there was no formal label, just my name, written neatly in my father's unmistakable handwriting. When I opened it, I found a USB drive along with a neatly folded piece of paper. My father's handwriting was there once more. In the event she ever comes back and chooses honesty, give her the remainder, just if you're fully prepared to know everything yourself. I inserted the USB into my computer. There were no films or personal notes to be found. What I found were lists of numbers, financial records, spreadsheets, contracts, an entire silent wilderness of reality. The trust, the fund, did in fact exist. It had been created 4 years before my father, Gerald Dunn, passed away, linked to an account in Montana, and concealed through Elmbridge Capital LLC. I was named as the one and only beneficiary. The value of the lakeside cottage, my hatchback, and the rental units made up just a portion of the whole picture. What rattled me more deeply was finding a note hidden within one of the files. It documented an earlier attempt I had made to claim the fund 2 years before. Alora Dunn's name appeared, her imitation of a signature, and a rejected request that the bank flagged and quietly dropped after my father died. She had made an attempt then and had not succeeded. I printed only what was essential: the trust agreement, the fabricated signature, and a concise page enumerating all the assets I was now officially entitled to. After that, I started writing, not preparing a confrontation or a speech, but composing a letter, one not addressed to my mother at all, only to the truth itself. For once I found myself unwilling for her to hear me. What I longed for was for my mother to read it. I looked at the document, finally seeing all the things that had always been right before me but unnoticed. When I was done, I folded it carefully, sealed it up, and set it next to her teacup. Now the truth belonged to her. Whatever she decided to do with it was out of my hands. The ride to the lakeside cottage passed in silence. She didn't question our destination until we turned into the gravel driveway. The moment my mother recognized it, her breath hitched. The siding was still pale, the porch swing remained, and the wind blowing off the lake carried that familiar scent of pine and salt. I stayed silent. I simply unlocked the door. She entered slowly, running her fingertips along the doorframe, as if making sure it wasn't a dream. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped by the old ceramic teapot I'd once found at a yard sale. On the shelf, her gaze landed on the framed picture of my father, Gerald Dunn, in his flannel, holding a fish. His grin was no match for the size of the one he caught. I let her drift through the house at her own pace. Once she settled onto the couch, I gently set the envelope in her lap and stepped out of the room. Hovering in the hallway, I caught the faint sound of paper being unfolded. Everything went quiet, followed by a shaky breath, and then a low, raw weeping that came in surges. The tears ebbed and flowed. She never called out for me. When I came back, she was clutching the letter in her hands, both of which were shaking. I took a seat facing her and simply waited. She didn't protest or deny anything. She offered no justification for her actions. Instead, She gazed at me as if she were meeting me for the first time. She didn't look at me as her daughter anymore, but as someone whose story could no longer be changed in her retelling. I told her she had a choice. She could walk away now with her pride, or she could stay, but not as my mother, only as a caretaker. This home, I explained, was about to serve as a sanctuary for women who'd been erased by those pretending to care about them deeply. Clara gave a single nod. I expressed my desire to remain. Rising to my feet, I lifted the window next to her. A surge of lakeside breeze poured in, and for the first time in a long while, it felt soothing rather than harsh. The air grounded me. The atmosphere seemed purified,